So, I was looking into my slides during the past few minutes, and surprisingly, I realized that I will start, so the slide after this, after the screen, the initial screen, I start where I left in the previous talk. This is beautiful. Of course, it was absolutely, trust me, totally unwanted, but that happened. So I have to say kudos and thank you to the guys who picked up these two talks in the list of 300 talks that I sent when we discussed my presence here at this conference. By the way, all this thinking brought back to my mind a nice anecdote that happened many years ago at a conference. They asked me to do a repeat of a session in the same day, so I had the regular session scheduled at time T in room 1, and then they asked me to do a repeat because there were so many people willing to come. They had to do a repeat. But actually, I found out that I'm completely unable to redo things. So even it was the same session, same content, same slides, the same demos, the same everything, some people complained because I delivered a completely different content or significantly different content the 2 times. So, okay, so that brought back to mind when I saw this, which is exactly the slides, the content. The Humphrey's law, the user of the software won't know what she wants until she sees the software. And the Wagner's lemma, an interactive system can never be fully specified, nor it can ever be fully tested. We often, this is an interesting thing, we often make a joke out of this. So we smile at users trying to describe what they want using contradictory words, sentences that cancel each other, and we make funny jokes out of that. And another typical aspect of developer is that we always complain that if it weren't for customers, if it weren't for the short notice, if it weren't for the time, we would have built the wonderful, the best system in the world. The time is never enough. Let's make a reason of this. Time is never enough. Time doesn't exist, okay? Time is a virtual, it's mixed reality, okay? Time is an abstraction. Doesn't exist. We don't have time. We never have time. If only I had enough. Bullshit. Time is never enough, period. Okay? So making sure it works is hard enough as a task, okay, to ever bother about design. So this is one way of looking at things. Make sure it works, okay? Before it is reusable, it is much better if it is usable. First. But there is also the other way around, the other extreme, the other edge of the spectrum. It works on my machine. Bullshit, it's crappy. It works, yes, but it's crappy. Where is design? Where is model? Where are, Stefano, I have to mention, to quote you, where is solid principles? Okay, so this is also another perspective of things. So do things right. And postpone learning about the right thing. Now, this is a statement, this is a vision, a slogan, a pattern, call the way you like it, that I, in a way, managed to learn on my own skin quite recently. It's common to find in offices, in the meeting rooms, on the whiteboard, the right thing, doing things right, make your choice. Frankly, I'm tempted to say that doing things right, so make it work, is more important than researching for the right way of doing things. So just make it work, and then we can discuss about make it reusable, better, nicer, and things and that. But how can we do things right, and what it means doing things right? In my opinion, and for the context of this talk, doing things right is doing things that the customer will pay for. It's all about money. Oh, by the way, in all these years of technical speaking, public presentations and conferences, events, I've always received jokes, compliments, congratulations, whatever, for the fact that I constantly move my hands when I talk. Then the first time that an American friend asked me about that, I said, "Do you know how we call hands in Italy? These are mani." So they got the joke anyway. So doing things right, what is this? That's a good question. How you see your system? Data, business, presentation, layers neatly separated, boundaries well designed, well shaped, perfect. How users see our system? Interface, black magic. Now, the funny thing is that this is not a joke. This is exactly the real world. And we developers tend to smile at this. But I mean, this is my personal redraw of a picture that was originally, or at least I found that originally published as a tweet a few years ago by MSDN, the Microsoft library, the Microsoft account. And they published this, well, to the best of my understanding, as a joke. Ha ha ha, how stupid our customers in general, because we developers, we do a good job, and then they just the interface, and then everything is black magic. Well, I think it's a much more serious thing, this one. Let's see what, sorry, okay, back here. Let's try now to focus more on the interface, which is what users see, and then let's try to ignore for a moment what is the black magic. And then we'll try to find out what could be in black magic. And probably you will find out that if you focus almost or primarily on the interface, then black magic comes naturally, to the point that it's not even magic, but it's just well-written code. User interface, if you wait until the last minute to complete the user interface, it only takes a minute. Obvious. Anonymous. The name cannot be said. So, if we build the system like it was done here, data, business, and presentation exploding from the core, the heart, from SQL Server, from Oracle, from the data, from the IT department. If we build the system from there, then the user interface, the presentation, is the last thing we focus on at the last minute, and it takes only 1 minute. And then users complain. And users complain primarily about the interface, because it's the only part of the system they deal with. You cannot sell something to a customer saying, well, yes, but this has a strong SQL Server, this is scalable, this has multiple threads, this handles concurrency. Well, Bill Gates tried, take head 2000, of selling Microsoft products in the keynote, saying the new version of Office uses XML. Who cares? Okay. Then it changed and said something more serious from that point onward. So anyway, we cannot seriously sell something to somebody if it's not usable, in the sense that the experience that users go through when they play with, they interact essentially with the system is not pleasant. But even more than pleasant, is just what they need. It's an experience that, in addition to be smooth, seamless, just allows them to achieve exactly the goals they have. So, in light of this, the interface, just because it's the only part of the system that users see and are aware of, it cannot be given only 1 minute at the last minute to be built. Many great ideas The history is full of anecdotes about systems that have been originally sketched out on paper napkins. It's the most powerful, well beyond mixed reality and those wonderful things, the paper napkin, that's the future. And if you use a paper napkin to plan, to jot down your ideas, you have a visual immediacy, missed points, caught surprisingly early. And more than everything else, in this way, you tend to focus on tasks and actions. And when you focus in the analysis, when you try to understand what you are going to build, okay, drawing things puts the emphasis on what you really need to do, what you want to show. You focus on the real phase of the final system, even though you are on a paper napkin, and Visual Studio doesn't support the paper napkins yet, not in this version. But the interesting thing is you focus on tasks, you focus on actions, and in doing so, you form a vision of the system where, surprisingly, front end and back end match up, in which the interface connects magically, interfaces magically with whatever there is underneath, with whatever sort of black magic you end up building. So let me briefly introduce you to something called event storming, which is let's call it a methodology you can use in parallel to classic requirements gathering you do through interviews, which end up being a flat list of statements in some sort of repository. When we interview customers, we ask questions, we are asked questions, we try to have points clarified, but we receive essentially a flat list of statements about the segment of the system that the particular user we are talking to understands and sees and perceives and reckons important, but it's just one view. Okay, we typically talk to multiple customers, multiple persons in the organization, so we, of course, get multiple views of the system we are going to create, but it's us to unite together, to form the algebraic union of the visions we have gathered so far into something that makes sense. And in doing so, in building our final model, which has to be then a software model, so something we could implement and give life, digital life, we sometimes have to drop some of the requirements we've got, even though those requirements are marked, oh, this is absolutely urgent. Yeah, you don't need it. No, trust me, you don't need it. You don't need it, but not because you're stupid and you don't need it. Don't need it because there is, in the final model that I envisioned, having gathered everything, there is for you another way, another path, another workflow that takes you to achieve exactly your business goals. So probably there will be, in the end, a completely different process, more rational, faster, smarter, that anyway allows you to achieve your goals even without this stupid, okay, useless requirement. So the event storming can be used, of course, side by side with classic interviews, but it's essentially a meeting with few people. The typical rule is the 2 pizza rule that historically was used at Amazon to size properly the people in rooms. So 2 pizzas, so as many people that can be fed using 2 pizza. There's a fantastic Dilbert comics on this point, with, okay, the manager introduces, oh, we're going to use the 2-pizza rule in our company, and then there's a lot of objections. What if I'm vegan? What if I can eat 1 pizza entirely myself? What if I'm hungry? And they said, stop being engineers. Go to work. Okay. So, but, okay, 2-pizza rule essentially counts 6 to 8 people, one of which is outside the involved parties, is the manager of the meeting. And so the remaining 5 to 7 people are more or less equally distributed between the team, the development team, and the customer. And the point, every meeting is highly focused on a segment of the system. So to a group of users that are going to use the final system. And it's about workflows. So when you ask questions, okay, what you as a user, okay, you are from the HR department, you are expected what from the system? I expect to have these functions. Okay, one at a time. What do you expect from function number 1? So how the system should face you, and what you expect the system to aspect and react to your actions. And you go step by step. And there are a number of surprising questions and aspects of the business, of the internal company processes that can come out this way. So imagine now we are discussing the checkout of an order in an e-commerce system. So, okay, what is the way the system has to react when an order is submitted? So imagine that before this there will be a UI, nice UI, with a form that represents the content of, imagine, a shopping cart. The user pushes the button, checkout, and this is what follows. This is the subsequent workflow. Now, the colorful blocks represent sticky notes of different colors. And you decide essentially what is the point of each color. So typically the yellow could represent a domain event, an action in blue, an alert note in red, a critical note in gray, and so forth. Order submitted. Okay, if the order is submitted, it can be not validated, in which case we show some or send some feedback to the user. Obvious step. Okay, if then. Imagine a flow chart. Okay, this is a smart way to create a flow chart. If the order is validated instead, there is another branch in our flow chart, and the processing begun. Okay, goods are packaged, goods are delivered to supply, an invoice is issued, and then in the end we email customers in 3 weeks. So imagine this is, high level, this is at the high level what happens. Okay, as a developer myself, say, okay, order is validated, okay, fine. Processing began, okay, exactly what does it mean? So what do you mean by, okay, we start processing the order? Okay, concretely, what does it mean? And customers should tell you more. But more importantly, at this point, customers should be forced to tell you exactly what they do internally when an order begins being processed. Because to us, order validated, okay, it's not obvious to a developer, to an architect, what is the next step, because it's business specific. But it's a piece of information that typically never shows up in a list of requirements. Goods are then, okay, packaged. So one, technically, getting into the demo here, something that as an architect I want to have cleared on paper is, okay, the validation of the order means exactly what? That you want me to check if you have goods ordered in stock. So you have in your stores exactly the goods that have been ordered or not. So, and if not, it means that the order has to be rejected or has to be handled in some other way. So kept in waiting and send an email to users. These are all aspects of the workflow that you will never ever find written in the flat list of requirements. And those things show up more naturally only if you go through a step-by-step process like this. Goods are packaged, goods are delivered to supplier. Another comment I would make as an architect is, okay, meanwhile, goods are packaged, so goods are waiting somewhere for quite some time until they are picked up by the company, the FedEx, the UPS, and how can we monitor and what kind of feedback are we going to give to our users after this? I expect to have answers on this point as well. Goods are delivered to supplier, the invoice is issued. Sure, this is your correct way of handling things. Should we issue the invoice before we physically start the process that delivers the goods? Maybe the answer could be this or the other. I'm not really interested in understanding from, I don't know, fiscal perspective, what is the right thing to do. I don't care, but I want to make sure that I've got things and I'm gonna coding things in the right order. In this discussion, for example, and I'm inspired by Amazon in this regard, the alert note, look, when I ask, what do you mean exactly that processing has begun? I could have the answer, the objection. We mean that after this point, we don't accept any more changes to the order. Okay? I learned more about the system. Goods packaged, goods delivered to supplier, probably with my objections, okay, how can we get hold of the information about the status of the order? It could be, oh, it would be nice if we can have a great UI there so that users can check the state of their order and see some, you know, the tracking, the position, the graphic position of the car going to shipping the goods. The output of this event storming session is not necessarily something something digital. It can be a picture you take, it can be notes, but in the end, abstractly speaking, this is a flow chart. This is a list of steps that, you know, outline point by point what happens when the user pushes the checkout button. I've seen this process generate a surprising kind of feedback. One is a customer that didn't reply for 3 weeks. He was supposed to give me feedback 3 days after the meeting, and then he said, because rerunning our own event storming sessions internally brought ourselves to learn so many new things about the process that we wanted to have implemented in the new system, that it took much longer than expected. Another even funnier story is I was with a customer and a couple of colleagues of mine were supposed to join us at a later time. So at some point I started asking questions to the customers. Why do you want this? And what do you do at this point? And why you want to do those things at this point? I was just challenging them to the point that they started yelling at each other. And I was completely not involved, so they were just, you know, quarreling themselves, and the 2 colleagues of mine approaching out of the door, so those, yeah, oh my God, they were scared to get into the room, and then they started opening the door, and I see me totally relaxed, and the other people just yelling at each other, trying to make sense of the exact process they wanted. But in the end, that software shipped perfectly on time, perfectly on budget, even a couple of weeks before, and with no issues at all. So this is extremely powerful, even storming. There is not much, there is a couple of guys that, you know, invented, so to speak, this approach. It's also discussed, because I like it and I use it in my architecture book. So there is not much documentation that you can find. There are pseudo ebooks, but there's no content at all. But the core idea is exactly what I have outlined. So what is the UX-driven design, which is a domain-driven design plus an extra attention, essentially a domain-driven design that takes you to building the system from the top downward instead of the other way around. Let me show you a quote from the Matrix. All I'm offering is the truth and nothing more. I would say that every team should have, ideally, 2 architect roles. I mean, not necessarily 2 different people with 2 different salaries. It could even be in one individual, so the role is not exactly a physical individual. There is the role of the software architect, which, to quote Matrix, faces the painful truth of the requirements and gets the red pill. There is the UX architect with the blue P that faces the blissful simplicity of visuals. These 2 guys interact, and the software architect is exactly the role that we are aware of, familiar with. It collects business requirements to build the best possible domain layer. The other collects usability requirements to build the best possible UX for the presentation layer. And we are talking about 2 distinct layers, and the 2 guys, of course, are part of the same team and they interact. So, responsibilities of a UX architect. Reasoning about the ideal architecture of the information, so how we display, how we present, how we manage the information throughout the system. Responsible for ideal user-machine interaction. Yes, okay, views, HTML views, JavaScript. Okay, the JavaScript or whatever plugins, whatever snippets, whatever advanced, why not, kind of tool that we can have to have the interaction with the user easier. Usability reviews, making sure that whatever we have designed really works for users, which means, for example, recording users in action, analyzing through videos the body language, monitor the time it takes to complete an operation. Now, not necessarily you do all those things. But if you, depending on the size of the company, the size of the customer, if you want to be serious about the presentation layer, these are things, recording, analyzing, monitoring, these are things you should pay attention to. So UXDD in 3 steps. What it means? It means start by creating screens as users love them. Once you have assessed the process, every process is triggered by a screen. So there should be an interaction, and most likely behind this interaction there is a screen you display to users. So design, sketch out those screens with users. Once you have those screens, well beyond the colors, the styles, the CSS, and those stupid things. But a screen here is fully identified by the description of the data that flows in and out of the screen. So what populates the screen and what information is posted from the screen to the back end of the system. Once you know these 2 classes, these 2 DTOs, this input and view model, you know exactly what gets into your backend and what should come out of your backend. At that point, you can trigger workflows from there. And the workflows do whatever they should be doing to implement business logic. You see that these 3 steps can be cut in the middle in 2 different sprints. Groups of collections of sprints. It's a sort of 2-step, 2-phase waterfall. And you iterate until screens are close to what users expect. And when that is cleared and signed off, you can go ahead and implementing the system the best way you can, making sure that whatever you provide works, is compatible with the flow in and out of the screens. So in summary, we can call UXDD as a two-phase waterfall with a low-cost design of the front end. Low cost because we are talking primarily about sketching, so I'm not considering the costs of physically implementing that. But I mean, on the other hand, if from sketches you know exactly what to build, it's, you know, it's something that even a JavaScript developer can do. Straight implementation of the back end. So in the end, it's probably longer than the classic bottom-up development, and the extra apparently the extra cost. What makes it longer is the extra time it takes for the sprints on sketches. But this is the good part, it has nearly no post-deployment costs. And it's there that projects become painful. You deploy, and it's not exactly what customers wanted. That is the sore point. So if we can make sure that at the upfront additional costs, we can nearly guarantee there will be no significant impact on post-deployment, everything that is known upfront can be charged. So anyway, we can have a much better way to manipulate the costs of projects. No post-deployment costs. Wow. Wow, because with Trump and Melania it would have been impossible to get a picture like this. So no post-deployment costs is the interesting part of the story. To put in another way, imagine we deal with, we cultivate carrots. So if you are a developer and you know the soil separates the presentation from the application, domain, and infrastructure, so as a developer, it's all about the carrot. You have huge carrots in the soil and just a little bit of, you know, leaves that are visible. If you are instead a user or a designer, it's all about you have a tree out of the soil and just a little bit on the small thing there, just a baby carrot in the soil. The reality is different. The reality, and okay, let's focus on how the animation happens now. So it's the sizes are more or less the same as in the real world, but they grow together. I try to render that. So the real world is a carrot that is of a decent size, and there is no tree, but also no just grass that pops up to represent the visible part of the system. Now, take a picture of me here and post and tweet for .NET Fest. Now, okay, serious. Okay, an image is worth sometimes, not always, million words. Essentially, the essence of UX-driven design is inspiring you to realize the proper size of carrots. Essentially, UXDD is about carrots. Okay, this is my favorite quote. User experience, what it is, the experience that users go through while they interact with the application. It's all about that. So UX, there's no colors, position, ergonomics. No. User experience is simply the experience, good or bad, that users go through when they interact with the system. And our purpose as engineers is just making this experience as smooth as possible. And we have the tools for that. It's not even smart tools. But we have to start changing our vision of the world. We have to mix our reality with the real world, okay? And stop thinking that, my system, they use black magic. It's all about that kind of black magic. Now, quickly, a few terms. Sketch, that you can find in papers along those topics. Sketch is a freehand drawing primarily done to jot down ideas on paper napkins. Why not? A wireframe is a more precise sketch that is focused on layout, navigation, and content. And there are quite a few tools. Balsamic, Axure, UX Pin, that are available to let you create wireframes in a sort of drag and drop way. Mockup has a wireframe, but with some UI attached, and you have a mockup, but at the later stage when the wireframe is defined and you just want to show, okay, how it looks like with colors and bells and whistles. More. Proof of concept is a small exercise to verify truthfulness of viability of an assumption. It's a joke. It's a, how I have some free time, I do a proof of concept to see if it could work. Prototype is a different thing. A prototype is a fake system simulating the behavior of the real system you are going to build. So the prototype is, it looks like, but it's not, because it has no storage or has very limited basic storage. It has no scalability. It doesn't scale, okay? It doesn't care about scalability. It doesn't care about performance. It simulates many behavior, but it gives a clear idea of the workflows through not the animation of a wireframing tool, but through real software. And finally, the pilot is a production-ready system only tested against a subset of the intended audience or the intended data. Sort of staging, kind of staging, or pre-staging product. There are, based on those terms, 3 different prototyping levels. Basic understanding of the system, we can achieve that with sketches. Basic prototyping, so how we move between screens and what each screen provides, the more important part, I would say. Basic prototyping, wireframes, and in a smaller number of situations, depending on the size of the project, essentially, prototypes, because there you have to write code. Sketches, paper napkins. Wireframes, there are tools that I invite you to consider. I mentioned, there's a next slide with a bunch of them. Prototypes, that requires more effort, so you probably want to charge for a prototype. For wireframes, it depends, it's up to you. I wouldn't do it free anyway, but it's up to you. Balsamic, Axure, UX Pin, just in mind, even PowerPoint, even Visio, Indigo Studio are those. But PowerPoint is interesting. If you have a PowerPoint and I think Visual Studio Professional on the same machine, some features are unlocked in PowerPoint, and you can use even PowerPoint to prototype and create wireframes. And now, in summary, if we go with our design bottom up, as we do probably these days, from requirements, we first build a data model. On top of that, we connect business logic, and then we put at the last minute some user interface on top of that. Except that when we do this in a bottom-up way, remember Apollo 13? So Houston, we have a problem, and to solve that problem, they gave essentially a square box to fit into a rounded hole. You have to make this to get into that, which is almost a problematic, seriously problematic issue, but only using whatever equipment they have on board. So sometimes when we find a model mismatch between what comes from the bottom and what has to be plugged from the top, if we have a model mismatch, that's what brings us post-deployment costs. But if we go instead the other way around, top-down, from requirements, we start building, designing, understanding the requirements of the user interface. And we know exactly what are the pins we can use to connect to the rest of the system. And then what is underneath the surface of the user interface, it's the black magic. And we know how to build the black magic because it's all about us building the black magic. So we can have a business logic that connects model cut to fit with the pins of the user interface. And at that point, the data model is the last thing. By the way, in domain-driven design, data access is part of the infrastructure, not because it doesn't matter, but because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the sense that it's not strictly, it's functional to the system, but it's not strictly dictating or not to the maximum anything on the system. Now, the interesting thing is that if we join together business logic and data model in a top-down way, we realize that this is black magic in the end. And we are back to the original picture that we started from. User interface, screen, 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 connected to application layer where we have workflow, 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 input model going down and view model coming back. Once you have a view model and input model assessed, and it's something you can start having clear in your vision after the wireframing stage, whatever you write that connects to the UI is written in the stars. It's there. You only have to look, okay, and bring it back. Domain layer, infrastructure layer, details, implementation details to some extent. The UX that users want, and the backend that supports just the UX that users want. And at this point, you can even cut this in two vertical slices, and you have a CQRS. And if you put a different database on each vertical stack, you also have event sourcing. So the buzzwords, the CQRS, event sourcing, you may have heard about, find here in this UXDD and this top-down development, their logical, theoretical justification. Okay, the lion is going to appear. In other words, UXDD is yet another DDD thing. Sorry about that. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much for the presentation. And if you have any questions, please raise your hands.
Yes, from the back.
Thank you for your speech. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
As for me, I see two risks in this approach. One of them is that user can decide that this application is not needed for him. For example, if you starting from top level to bottom, on stage when you design your user interface, user can design that you don't need this application or something like that. Or he could choose another developer. So you cannot have one-year project which will fail at the end. So you will be without salary for 1 year. Another one risk is, you know, some projects could be failed on the last stage. Just because a lot of different features, a lot of time spent on user interface. But main logic is not so good. So how this approach could help you avoid these things?
What I'm saying is simply that the effort you put on the user interface, which, I mean, I'm not talking about months or years, is only aimed at understanding exactly how many screens you're going to have and what comes in and out of those screens. And those are the things that become the input and the output for the back end. So most of the time is anyway spent on the back end, but you know exactly what you are going to produce. And at the same time, the users probably will have been able to communicate their preferred way of working. I mean, if a user can convince that it's nice to have a a list of items here, or they can tell you what is the natural way for them to create accounts or add information into the system, even though that is not exactly the same as the model you would like to create. Okay, you figure out that, okay, users can provide me these pieces of data, and based on that information, I build whatever is required. So it's not that necessarily you spend months and months and months on the user interface. The first step is mostly about figuring out exactly what is the input, case by case, you are going to have, and what kind of output to keep users happy you have to produce. In other words, we always discuss about the difference between the persistence model, so how we persist data, and how we represent data. The point is, if you start with understanding what you have to represent, then how you persist data is up to you, and you can choose even a completely different, non-relational approach, as long as you think that it suits your performance, scalability, or whatever needs. Was another question there?
Yep.
Thank you very much. What about two questions?
Yep.
One is joke. What about taking two pills in one time, red and blue?
It's a matter of money.
Okay. Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
So
if you have enough money, you have two pills at different times. Otherwise,
I mean, taking both approaches, best from both approaches. And the second, I'm serious. Business logic and business based not only on the things that are on UI, but also on in the business layer. So when, okay, we'll start from interviewing and from UI, and then we somehow need to take domain experts from customer side and ask them about business logic. So whether this approach also applicable here?
Well, I mean, if you go with the event storming approach, you need to have their, you primarily want to have their domain experts. Because, I mean, the event storming is fundamentally how you understand the steps, being the workflows. I mean, event storming is about workflows, and workflows are in the black magic part. So they are workflows that are to be connected to the UI. So the UI analysis, in a way, is aimed at providing you the input and the output of the workflow. So you know what comes in, what comes out, and the workflow is in the middle. But you figure out workflows, so the business logic, the orchestration of calls to the business logic pieces through event storming, and there you will have definitely domain experts.
So event storming, it's not only about user interface, but also about business logic.
Quite the reverse. It's primarily about business logic. But of course, to discuss a workflow, you first should assess what comes in. So where do you get data to process through the workflow? So it's both things in a way. But I would say it's probably 30% about the UI and 70% about the process, about the workflow. So domain experts. Or you can have, in a way, I mean, the idea is you form, the way I do that, you form an idea of the processes, a clear idea of the processes, talking to domain experts. Talking to them, you try to figure out what could be a reasonable shape for the screens, and then when this is clear in your mind, you produce quick wireframes, you run those by end users, but just to see if there is some patent, blatant mistake on your end, you build the screens that can essentially work well, connect well to the workflows. So the point is understanding the steps, but also the input and the output. Then how you laid out the input, that's a stupid thing, just wireframes, okay? If you know that your form can capture 3 pieces of data, username, password, and remember me, getting these 3 pieces of information is critical. How those are laid out, if with a checkbox, with a toggle button, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but the key part is figuring out that you trigger with the login, when the user pushes login, you trigger a process, a workflow that starts with 3 input data, username, say email, say remember me, and produces an authentication cookie or token or whatever it is. Those are input and output, the things you have to figure out, and how you validate credentials. The layout is bullshit. Okay, it matters, but it's fundamentally, it's CSS, or sort of, okay? Oh, the other question was a joke, yes, okay. I got it.
Okay, thank you very much. So unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions. So Dino, thank you once more for such amazing
I love
and
you,
interesting
Ukraine.
presentation.